Tom Cotton. Senator, good morning to you.
Good morning, everyone.
What do you make of the fact, Peter just mentioned this, that the federal government is taking the extraordinary measure of sending out word to any federal employee, hey, how would you like to leave that boring job in Washington and come down to our southern border for up to 120 days because it's all messed up down here?
Well, I was there last week, and what I saw was an absolute crisis. These scenes are heartbreaking, of course. You have young moms and dads with small children sitting under a bridge in the middle of the night waiting to be processed. Inside some of these facilities, you have small children without even parents there who are sleeping right next to each other in large, I guess you might call them cages, guys. They've replaced the chain link fence with plastic plastic walls, but still they're packed in tight. But all of that, Steve, is addressing the symptoms, not the cause. Asking federal employees to deploy to the border, addressing the symptoms, not the cause. The cause is Joe Biden opening our border and saying anyone who comes here can get in, especially anyone who has a child under the age of 18. Well, guess what you get? Tens of thousands and soon hundreds of thousands and more of people showing up with young kids. I spoke to several of them on Friday night or Thursday night underneath that bridge, and I asked them why they came. Almost to a person, they said to find a job or to get a better life. They didn't say they were facing persecution because of their race or ethnicity or sex or political views or religion. They came because they want a better life, which I can understand, but that's not basis for asylum under our country's laws. They are coming because Joe Biden dismantled the highly effective policies of the Trump administration. They could reinstitute all those today. They could say we're going to turn back everyone who comes to the border because of the pandemic. They could say you have to adjudicate your asylum claims in the first country you enter after you leave your country, most likely Guatemala. And if you get to our border, you have to remain in Mexico. All of those were highly effective policies, and not a single one resulted in kids or even adults being turned back into the Mexican desert, as Joe Biden and others in his administration have lied. They put them back on planes, they sent them home. And after you send them home on one plane and their neighbors and their countrymen see that, guess what? The rest of them stopped coming.
Yeah.
Right. Senator Ted Cruz was on that trip with you, and he was at a facility in Donna, I think it was Donna, Texas, and a staffer came up to him and said, you need to put down your phone. You're not allowed to record this. Watch this.
You don't want the pictures taken. The rules are arbitrary, and they're designed to keep the American people in the dark.
Dignity and respect. That's all we ask.
Well,
Dignity
no, it's
and
not.
respect.
You're asking, is this dignity and respect? Look at these people. There's a
dignity and
pandemic.
Respect to the people.
Let me ask you. There's a pandemic.
I respectfully ask you, sir.
There is a pandemic. Is this respecting the rights of these kids?
I ask you. Please
Are you
respect
respecting the rights of these kids?
This is not a zoo, sir. Please don't treat the people.
You're right. And this is a dangerous place.
Please don't treat the people
and your
like
policies,
this. That's all I ask
unfortunately,
for you,
are trying to hide them. I understand you were instructed. When 18 senators came down here,
please respect the people, give them dignity
I
and respect.
respect them, and I want to fix this situation.
We all want to fix
the administration you're working for is responsible for these conditions.
Senator, tell us what you experienced. What's going on in that video?
Yeah, I saw the same thing. This little political apparatchik who's been working for the Biden administration for 2 weeks came down and tried to tell senators in my group, like Dan Sullivan, to put their phones away or they were going to be escorted out of the facility, and it just made me wonder who was going to actually do that. Since the Border Patrol agrees that Joe Biden's policy is utter and total failure. That's the thing we consistently heard, is if you let them in, more will come. Not shockingly, if you say that minors get into the country, or that anyone who shows up with a child under the age of 6 gets into the country, guess what? You get more of them into the country. It leads to the heartbreaking scenes that we've seen in some of these pictures and videos from my colleagues. But again, those are all just the symptoms, not the cause. The cause is letting them into the country in the first place. And once they're in, they will never go home.
Right.
Many of them aren't even getting a notice to appear in court. And if they do appear in court, and they get a notice of removal to deportation, well, Joe Biden has halted deportations.
Yeah.
These people know that they can get into our country and they're never going to have to go home and they can lead a better life. That is the ultimate failure of our immigration system. It could all be solved by simply saying, you cannot get in, do not come. If you do, we will send you home.
You don't have a big heart when you say every unaccompanied minor gets to stay. I think you're not thinking this through, because if every kid comes, what about the kids that are here? We don't exactly have a social infrastructure right now overrun with cash. We're $27 trillion in debt. We have a lot of foster kids that need homes. We have a lot of kids that need to be adopted. Why are we taking in 4 different countries? And I'll bring something else up. They made 2 ridiculous statements. Joe Biden says he replaced a light on the city block and he stopped gangs in Central America. Remember that from Thursday. And then yesterday, Kate Bedingfield says we're going to put money into open up boys' clubs in these triangle countries. That's right. They're here because there are no boys' clubs. That's really going to make tremendous progress. Maybe we can play intramural basketball or tag. That will really stem this. So, I mean, some of the things they're saying are farcical, and they're never pressed on them.
Yeah, they are, Brian. And let's look at the facts as well. I mean, these countries like Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras, look, they're not heaven on earth, but there are plenty of places in those countries that are safe. And you have a first duty, if you want to seek asylum, is to seek it within your own country, move to a safer part of your own country. And those countries as a whole have lower murder rates than some American cities like Baltimore. So these people who are claiming they want to come here and seek asylum have no basis under our law to seek asylum. Just because your country has some violence, just because it's poorer than the United States, doesn't give you a basis to come here. You have to be the victim of systematic persecution for things like your religious views or your political views or your race or your sex. Not a single one with whom I spoke claimed that the other night. They all were responding to Joe Biden and to his decisions to allow them in. And if we let them in, more will come by the hundreds of thousands.
They're coming.
And it's going to cost hardworking taxpayers billions of dollars. And it's going to put not just our border security at risk, it's going to put our national security at risk as well.
That's absolutely right. All right, let's talk a little bit about your day job, aside from your trip last week down to Texas. And that is, as a U.S. Senator, it sounds like very soon you're going to be considering even more legislation. It has gigantic price tags. If you thought the $2 trillion economic stimulus for COVID was big, that just turns out to be an appetizer. It looks like, Senator, there could be a $3 trillion immigration bill. At least that's what Jen Psaki alluded to yesterday on Fox News Sunday. Watch this.
I don't think Republicans in this country think we should be 13th in the world as it relates to infrastructure. Roads, railways, rebuilding them, that's not a partisan issue. That's a lot of what the president will talk about this Wednesday. Then he will have another package, another proposal that he will put forward in just a couple of weeks that will address a lot of issues that American people are struggling with, child care, the cost of health care. So that's what they can expect to hear from him in April.
So that's all part of an infrastructure. I had said immigration. Democrats are actually considering putting immigration into the infrastructure. They're also talking about drug prices, health care, pre-K, anything they can think of. They know, Senator, that this is the last chance before the train leaves the station to put everything in that, because they want to get rid of the filibuster, and they just want to pass it with a simple majority through reconciliation.
Well, they have a lot of proposals, Steve, that they want to try to jam through on a straight party line vote, on a simple majority vote in the U.S. Senate, because they know their agenda is extremely unpopular. What they're calling an infrastructure bill, by all accounts, looks like a Trojan horse. They're going to, 1, raise a bunch of taxes on American businesses and families, and then 2, they're going to stuff that bill not with money for roads and bridges and highways, but for their long-standing liberal priorities. We could reach a bipartisan compromise on infrastructure. We did just 5 years ago. It got more than 80 votes, and it didn't raise taxes. One thing we did was streamline a lot of regulation and permitting requirements that liberals have piled on our country for decades. That's one reason why it only took about a year and a half to build the Pentagon, which is still the world's largest office building in the 1940s, but it took years to repair, simply to repair a bridge in front of the Pentagon that only runs a couple hundred feet. It's that kind of regulatory burdens and red tape that has driven up the cost of infrastructure in this country so high. We should keep our focus on where we can have the biggest impact without adding more and more taxes on the American people. So, I mean, the administration now, through Pete Buttigieg, is saying they may tax how many miles we drive in our vehicles. So I guess they're going to require us all to download an app on our smartphones or install something in our vehicles to tell the government where we're driving at every single minute so the government can send us a tax bill at the end.
They already know. They're tracking us all.
There are also ideas of taxing people if you move. If you move to a lower tax state, they're going to tax you if you move during the pandemic. Speaking of the pandemic, we all want to know the origin of how this thing started, because so many people have lost their lives, and it's just paused our entire world. And the WHO sent a group of experts over to China to try to investigate. And Jamie Metzel, who's a former National Security Council official in the Clinton administration and a member of the WHO Advisory Committee, was interviewed on 60 Minutes and said this is no investigation. China's setting all this up. Listen.
Really call what's happened now an investigation. It's essentially a highly chaperoned, highly curated study tour. Everybody around the world is imagining this is some kind of full investigation. It's not. This group of experts only saw what the Chinese government wanted them to see. It was agreed first that China would have veto power over who even got to be on the mission. Secondly,
and WHO agreed to that.
WHO agreed to that. But imagine if we had asked the Soviet Union to do a co-investigation of Chernobyl. It doesn't really make sense.
What is your reaction to that?
Well, he's right about that. This was not an investigation. It was not a real inquiry by the WHO. I mean, they went to Wuhan and had the equivalent of coffee and donuts in a conference room at Wuhan, and were told by Chinese officials, like, nothing to see here. This was a bat in that wet market. Or maybe it was American soldiers or frozen food from abroad. They didn't get to conduct a real investigation because China is continuing to cover up the origins. As I've said now for over a year, the best case of looking at the evidence, circumstantial evidence, but the evidence we have available, thanks to the Chinese cover-up, is that this virus was being studied in one of those labs in Wuhan, and it accidentally escaped. That's the best evidence. We may never know for sure because China has probably destroyed a lot of the evidence, but it's on China. It's incumbent upon China to explain what happened. I and many others have concluded that that is the best explanation for why this virus originated, where it did, and how it did. If China wants to disprove it, they're welcome to come forward. But China has a long history of laboratory sloppiness. They had safety concerns about this specific laboratory as well, as reported by our diplomats a couple years ago. I think the best case is that this was an accidental leak from that lab in Wuhan, and China should be responsible for it.
And there's nobody better we could be speaking to right now than you. You were the first one, I think you said, in December or January to stop the flights from China and look at the Wuhan lab, and they came out ripping at you. Irresponsible lawmaker makes a statement. They probably will arrest you if you ever show up in China, and you end up being 100% right. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, said yesterday, when asked about punishing China for the pandemic, he kind of punted on it. We just want to make sure to stop the next one. Should we be looking at punishment for the country that poisoned the world and seems to be profiting from it?
Yeah, Brian, I mean, that's why I've introduced legislation that would take away their immunity from lawsuits in America from people who have suffered because of this virus. There's other steps we can take, too, though, that'll hit China where it hurts in their pocketbook, through the tariffs we've placed on them, through trying to decouple our economy from China's economy on a targeted and sensible basis, from sanctioning those people that were involved in the cover-up of this outbreak. So there are many steps we can take, both directly and indirectly, to make China pay.
Yeah, H&M and Nike are getting that course now. They're getting sanctioned because they spoke up about the slave labor to make their stuff, and now they're getting sanctioned. I think there should be a notice to corporations in America to bring your stuff here or make it somewhere else.
Senator,
get it out of China.
Senator, thank you very much for spending a little of your Monday with us.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you all.
You bet.